Most people believe they know Jerusalem. They imagine quiet streets, golden light touching ancient stones, a place of peace, devotion, and pure holiness. But that was not the real city, not at that time. Jerusalem was not calm, not silent, and certainly not safe. It was a city under pressure, political, religious, and social, a place where heaven was invoked, yet power was contested.
Everything happening here is only part of the story.
In 7 days, this city will never be the same. This ends now. It has to.
Where prayers were offered, yet decisions were manipulated. Where people sought God while living under the weight of an empire. At that time, Jerusalem was under the rule of the Roman Empire. Soldiers watched from the walls with weapons ready and eyes alert, not to protect, but to control. And within the city, the religious system was not merely spiritual, it was political, strategic, necessary to maintain order, and often power. At the center of everything stood the temple, not only as a place of worship, but as the heart of the entire structure. There, faith and interest met, devotion and system walked side by side, and the people lived in the middle of it all. Ordinary men and women, entire families trying to survive, trying to believe, trying to keep hope alive. Because there was a promise, ancient and deep, of liberation, of redemption, that God would intervene once again, just as he had before. And that hope was not small. It was intense, urgent, almost tangible in the air, especially as the city began to fill with pilgrims from every direction, walking for days or weeks just to be there. Jerusalem was not just a point on a map. It was the center of everything, the place where heaven and earth seemed to meet, and yet one of the most unstable environments of the ancient world. Because the greater the hope, the greater the tension, and the greater the expectation, the more dangerous everything became. And here is what many have never stopped to consider. The most important events in history did not happen in a perfect setting, nor in silence, nor in peace. They happened here, in this charged environment, in this constant tension between faith and power, between promise and reality, between what man controlled and what God was about to do. Jerusalem was not merely the stage of history, it was an essential part of it. And understanding that changes everything. It changes how you see every detail, every decision, every moment. Because nothing there was coincidence. Everything was converging, every crowded street, every prayer spoken, every hidden conflict, pointing towards something greater, something about to happen that would change the world forever. Jerusalem did not become important overnight. It was built over centuries, with faith, blood, victories, and losses. At first it was just a city, until David arose. With him, Jerusalem ceased to be ordinary. It became a capital, a symbol, the center of a people who were not just a nation, but a living promise. After him came Solomon, and what had once been a symbol became glory. The temple was built, magnificent, imposing, unlike anything around it, a place where the invisible seemed to touch the visible, where man did not only speak to God, but believed he stood before him. For a time, everything seemed secure. The kingdom established, the spiritual center defined, the identity preserved. But history never remains still, and Jerusalem would soon discover that. Empires came, one after another. Babylon arrived with destruction, tearing down walls, burning the temple, and taking the people away. For the first time, Jerusalem ceased to be the center, but it was never forgotten. Even far away, the people still prayed facing it, holding on to the hope of return. And they returned, under the rule of Persian Empire. Then came the Greek Empire, bringing new ideas, another culture, new pressures. Jerusalem remained, wounded but alive. Then Rome rose, not only conquering but controlling, organizing, imposing order through fear. The city existed under that weight, without freedom, yet still sustained by something that never disappeared. The promise. The certainty that God would still act, that history would not end in oppression. A king would come, not like the others, not raised by armies, but sent by God. A deliverer, a Messiah. That expectation grew in silence, crossing generations, passed from parents to children. The more the empires ruled, the more the people longed for something greater than any human power. Jerusalem was not just an occupied city, it was a waiting city. And when an entire city carries that kind of hope, everything gains weight. Every word, every movement, every sign could mean something greater, because history was already in motion long before any crowd appeared, and Jerusalem, without realizing it, was moving closer to its most decisive moment. There were times when everything intensified. Passover was one of them. It was not just a celebration, it was living memory. A reminder that those people had once been slaves and had been set free. Every year, that story returned, and with it, the dangerous hope that it could happen again. From every place they came, men, women, children, entire families. Jerusalem, with around 80,000 inhabitants, turned into hundreds of thousands. Crowded streets, full houses, tents spread across the Mount of Olives, fires burning, voices singing, psalms echoing through the night. It was beautiful, but also dangerous, because it was not just a crowd, it was a crowd with memory, celebrating liberation under Roman rule. And the Roman Empire watched everything. Soldiers alert, vigilant, ready to respond to any sign. A full city is already unstable. A city full of hope can become a spark. Inside the houses, silence carried meaning. The lamb was prepared, the unleavened bread, the bitter herbs. The questions were repeated. Why is this night different? And the answers brought Egypt back, as if it had happened yesterday. But that year, something was different. There was a tension in the air, hard to explain, as if everything was converging toward an inevitable point. While lambs would be sacrificed, someone was approaching the city along those same roads, hearing the same songs, but carrying something no one fully understood. Passover had always pointed to liberation, but this time, liberation would take on a new meaning. Jerusalem was ready, full, loud, heavy with expectation, about to become the stage of the most important event in history. And the city was never silent. Before dawn, the streets were already alive, vendors shouting, animals being led, hurried footsteps, voices in different languages. It was as if the whole world had gathered there. The markets were the heart of this movement. Coins clinking, goods being exchanged, faith becoming transaction, animals for sacrifice, money changers controlling values, everything running without pause. And there was the smell, strong, unavoidable, a mixture of food, incense, dust, and life. Jerusalem was not perfect. It was intense, chaotic, real. And perhaps that is exactly what reveals something deeper. The most transformative moment in history was not born in silence or isolation. It emerged in the midst of chaos, among ordinary people, within an imperfect system. And it is in this setting, full of voices, tension, and expectation, that a voice would begin to stand out, not by force, but by authority. And when that happened, nothing would remain the same. There is something about Jerusalem that rarely appears in stories. It is not in paintings or idealized representations, but it was impossible to ignore. The smell. A city built for around 80,000 people was now receiving hundreds of thousands without enough structure to sustain it. Water was limited, brought through aqueducts from the hills, an impressive work, but insufficient, especially during Passover, when demand exploded. And even here, division was clear. In the upper city, the wealthy had their own cisterns, hidden reserves, control. They could purify themselves, fulfill the rituals. Below, reality was different. Long lines, people under the sun, waiting with urgency and need. Water was not just a resource, it was a privilege, and that revealed something profound. In a city where purity was required, not everyone had access to the conditions to be considered pure. And there was what many preferred to ignore. Outside the walls, the valley of Hinnom, Gehenna, where refuse burned continuously. Fire, smoke, waste, a constant smell that reached the city, a reminder that behind the appearance there was decay. It was not only physical, it was symbolic. Jerusalem carried that same contradiction, outwardly sacred, imposing, inwardly unequal, burdened, strained. This is where everything begins to make sense. When Jesus Christ spoke about purity, it was not theory, it was reality. When he spoke about what truly defiles a person, people understood, because they lived in a system where the outside could appear clean, but the truth was not always the same. When he mentioned Gehenna, it was not a distant idea. It was a real, visible place with constant fire, a living image of consequence, of everything that is discarded and consumed. Perhaps that is what makes it all even more powerful. The words that would change the world were born from reality, from what people saw, felt, and faced every single day. And in the middle of that city, marked by thirst, inequality, and smoke on the horizon, a message began to rise. Not about rituals, but about transformation. Not about appearance, but about truth. And that message was about to confront the very center of everything, the temple. At the heart of Jerusalem stood something that dominated everything, not only visually but spiritually. The temple, built under Herod the Great, it was not just a building, but a declaration of power. Massive stones, imposing structures, details that reflected light almost blindingly. From a distance, impossible to ignore. Up close, impossible not to be amazed. There stood the center of an entire people's faith, the place where man sought to draw near to God. But the temple was also a system, organized, divided, with controlled access, courts, boundaries, barriers. Even the Holy of Holies, where they believed the divine presence dwelled, was accessible only to the high priest once a year. Everything there said the same thing, limited access. And right at the entrance of that system, something changed the meaning of that place completely. Commerce, tables, coins, animals, constant movement, money changers exchanging currency, sellers offering ready sacrifices, everything available, everything with a price. And that was the problem. Pilgrims arrived exhausted, with no alternative, paying what was demanded, often unfairly. What was meant to facilitate worship had become a heavy structure, controlled by interests tied to those at the top. Then, on what seemed like an ordinary day, everything changed. Jesus Christ entered. He saw the tables, he heard the coins, he observed the animals, and he understood not only what was happening, but what it had become. And he did not remain silent. He confronted it. Tables were overturned, coins fell to the ground, animals scattered, the sound of order breaking, control being challenged. And in the midst of it, his words echoed like a direct accusation, a clear reminder that what should have been a house of prayer had become something else. In that moment, everything changed. It was not just an act. It was a declaration against the system, against abuse, against the distortion of the sacred. The people saw it, the leaders understood it, and those in power recognized immediately this was dangerous. Because to touch the temple was to touch the center of everything, to challenge authority, to disrupt what sustained the system. From that moment on, the tension was no longer just in the air, it became personal, direct, unavoidable. Now it was no longer only about a city or a people, it was about someone who chose to confront everything that was wrong. And when that happens, conflict becomes only a matter of time. To understand what was about to happen, it is necessary to understand what was already happening every day. The temple was not only a place of prayer, it was a system of constant sacrifice, organized, uninterrupted. From sunrise to the end of the day, priests in position defined roles, precise movements, nothing random, everything following a pattern established over generations. But during Passover, everything intensified. It multiplied. It became impossible to ignore. Thousands of people brought their animals, lambs being led, lines forming, expectation mixed with tension. Then came the moment of sacrifice. The animal was handed over, the priest performed the ritual, the blood collected and passed from hand to hand in rapid, precise sequence, almost like a production line, until it was poured out on the altar. This did not happen a few times. It happened thousands of times in just a few hours. The sound was not one of reverent silence. It was movement, constant activity, the weight of a system operating at its limit. And the blood flowed, literally, carried through channels, prepared to lead it outside, descending into the valley, not as a distant symbol, but as visible reality. Everyone there knew what it meant. The sacrifice represented substitution. Someone paid so that another could be spared. That was how the people understood it. Error demanded a response, failure required a cost, and that system was how they dealt with it. But there was something many did not realize. All of it pointed to something greater, something that had not yet happened. Because while thousands of lambs were being sacrificed, one man was walking through the city, observing, knowing, understanding the true meaning of it all. Jesus Christ did not see only rituals, he saw fulfillment. He did not see only tradition, he saw purpose. Because the system was never the end, it was always a sign, a preparation, a language pointing to something final. And this is where everything connects. In the same period, in the same context, in the same setting, he would be delivered, not on the temple altar, but outside the walls of Jerusalem. And at the very moment when the lambs of Passover were being sacrificed, something greater would take place. Not as repetition, but as fulfillment, not as symbol, but as reality. Those who understood would never look at the system the same way again, because they realized that everything across generations had been pointing to that moment. And those who did not understand continued to see only the ritual without realizing they were living in the fulfillment of what they practiced. This makes it even more powerful, because the most decisive moment in history did not happen apart from the past. It happened within it, fulfilling, revealing, and completing what had long been only a shadow. Now the tension was complete. The stage was set, the system was in motion. All the elements were aligned, because when meaning meets the moment, nothing can stop what comes next. Jerusalem was not just a crowded city, it was a divided one, not only between rich and poor, but between visions, beliefs, and different ways of seeing God and the future. And in that moment, all of them were there, in the same place, under the same tension, under the rule of the Roman Empire, each group convinced it had the answer. The Pharisees were respected, teachers of the law, experts in the scriptures, attentive to every detail. They taught the people and took faith seriously. They believed in resurrection, in God's justice, in the importance of righteous living. But they also created a complex system, rules upon rules, interpretations upon interpretations, and often what was meant to bring people closer became a burden, a demand, a distance. On the other side were the Sadducees, the elite, those who controlled the temple and held positions in the Sanhedrin. Pragmatic, they avoided conflict with Rome because they knew their position depended on it. They rejected ideas like the resurrection and focused on maintaining the system, because maintaining the system meant maintaining power. There were also the Essenes, who looked at Jerusalem and saw corruption, distortion, a system that no longer represented what it should, and chose to withdraw. They went into the desert, waiting for God to act without human intervention. But others thought differently. The Zealots believed waiting was not enough, that freedom had to be taken through force, resistance, struggle. They saw Rome as a direct enemy and were willing to act, even to die. And Rome knew it. Everything was monitored, observed, controlled. And at the center of this fragile balance stood Pontius Pilate, not as a distant villain, but as the administrator responsible for maintaining order, preventing uprisings, and ensuring that everything continued to function. For him, Jerusalem during Passover was a constant risk, a crowd of hundreds of thousands celebrating liberation under Roman rule, the kind of scenario that could erupt at any moment. And that made everything even more intense, because all these groups, with different ideas, goals, and strategies, were there at the same time, in the same place, in the same week. And in the middle of all this, someone appeared, with no army, no political position, no institutional support, but with authority, clarity, and a message that did not fit into any of those groups. Jesus did not speak like the Pharisees. He did not seek power like the Sadducees. He did not withdraw like the Essenes. He did not fight like the Zealots. And yet, he drew the attention of all of them. And that was exactly the problem, because when someone cannot be controlled, they become unpredictable. And when they become unpredictable, they become dangerous to every side. In that moment, it became clear. The tension was no longer just environmental or systemic. It now had a focus, a name, a presence. And from that point on, events would no longer be merely possible. They would become inevitable. Everything that had been built up to this point, the history, the tension, the expectation, now reached its breaking point. And it began with something that, at first glance, looked like victory. Jesus Christ entered Jerusalem not with armies or military force, but riding on a donkey, simple, quiet, and yet the city reacted. Crowds gathered, people moved, stirred, pressed closer. Cloaks were thrown on the road, branches were lifted, and voices began to rise. Hosanna, a cry, a plea, a declaration, save us now. Emotion took over. Expectation grew, because for many at last the deliverer had arrived. But not everyone saw it that way. From a distance the Pharisees watched, disturbed, concerned, because things were slipping out of control. And above it all, observing carefully once again, was Pontius Pilate, for whom this was not celebration, but risk, the possible beginning of a revolt. And Jerusalem was already too full to handle more tension. But this was only the beginning. In the following days, the intensity only increased. Jesus taught in the temple, spoke openly, without retreat, without softening. He confronted leaders, exposed hypocrisy, answered difficult questions, and at times left even the most prepared without an answer. Their silence said everything, and it only intensified the conflict, because the more he spoke, the more the system was exposed, and the more it was exposed, the more urgent it became to silence him. Then came the night. A table, a private moment, Passover being celebrated. But this time, something changed. He took the bread and redefined its meaning. He took the wine and pointed to something beyond the ritual, not as repetition, but as fulfillment. The disciples listened, but did not fully understand, because what was being said went beyond anything they had known. The night moved forward, and with it, betrayal. In the Garden of Gethsemane, in silence and darkness, everything shifted. He was handed over, not by a distant enemy, but by someone close, one of his own. From that moment on, everything moved quickly. Trials, accusations, rushed decisions. The Sanhedrin acted with urgency, but there was a limit. They could not execute him. They needed Rome. And so he was brought again before Pontius Pilate. Looks, questions, silence, hesitation. Pilate sensed that something did not fit, but the pressure grew, the crowd shifted, and the same voices that had cried Hosanna now cried something else, louder, more decisive. The decision was made. The cross, outside the walls, as was Roman custom, public, exposed, final. And at the same time, inside the city, in the temple, the lambs of Passover were being sacrificed, the same period, the same moment, a precise parallel. Then came death. Silence. The end, or at least it seemed so. Because 3 days later, something happened. The tomb was empty, not as a symbol, not as an idea, but as reality. Witnessed, reported, lived by those who were there. And in that moment, everything changed. not only for Jerusalem, but for the entire world. That week was not just intense, it was not only historical, it was definitive. It marked the point where everything that came before found its meaning, and everything that came after was transformed. And the most striking part is this: most of the people who were there had no idea what was truly happening, yet they were living the moment that would change everything, forever. For a time, it seemed like everything would continue as before. The temple was still there. The rituals continued. The city kept breathing, even after everything. But there had been a declaration, spoken almost in silence, ignored by many, an impossible claim. Jesus had said that this place would not remain, that a time would come when not one stone would be left upon another. And for years, nothing happened. Life went on. The system kept functioning. The temple remained the center. But the tension never disappeared. Rome still ruled. The people still resisted. And instability kept growing, in silence, until, at last, it erupted. In the year 70 AD, the Roman Empire responded with full force. Legions surrounded Jerusalem, no way out, no escape. The city that had once been filled with pilgrims was now trapped, starving, desperate. The siege began. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. What had once been abundance became scarcity. What had once been movement became survival. Inside the walls, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Hunger, fear, internal conflict. And the city that was already divided began to collapse from within. Then came the end. Roman forces invaded. They broke through the defenses and advanced through the streets, meeting little resistance strong enough to stop them. And at the center of it all stood the temple. That imposing, magnificent place, once thought untouchable, now overtaken. And then, the fire. Flames rose, structures gave way. And the unthinkable happened before their eyes. The place that represented everything was being destroyed, stone by stone, not as a metaphor but literally. Every block removed, every part torn down. Nothing remained exactly as had been foretold. In that moment, something far greater than a building was lost. The system ended. The place of sacrifice disappeared. The center of religion as it had existed ceased to exist. There was no longer an altar, no longer a lamb, no longer a way to continue as before. The impact was immense. Jerusalem was devastated, its streets in ruins, its structures reduced to dust. The city that carried centuries of history became only a shadow of what it once was. But this is where everything changes. While the city was falling, something had already left it, something that did not depend on stones, walls, or physical structures: the message. What began in that week did not remain confined there. It was not destroyed with the temple. It did not end with the system, because it had already begun to spread before the fall, before the end. And that reveals something powerful. Everything that seemed permanent fell. Everything that seemed untouchable disappeared. But what seemed small survived, and not only survived but grew, expanded, strengthened. Because the fall of Jerusalem was not the end of the story. It was the end of an era, and the beginning of something the entire world would feel. Jerusalem fell. The temple vanished. The system ended. Everything that seemed permanent was gone. And for a moment, it could have looked like the end of a history, a tradition, a people as they knew it. But it was not. Because while the stones were being torn down, the message had already gone beyond them. It was already outside the walls, being carried from city to city, from person to person, by ordinary men, without political power, without an army, without structure, but with conviction. Conviction that what they had seen was real, that what had happened changed everything. And so Jerusalem ceased to be only a geographic center and became a point of origin. Because the message began there, but it did not remain there. It traveled roads, crossed borders, entered different cultures, and reached even the heart of the Roman Empire. What seemed small became impossible to contain, because it no longer depended on a temple, a system, or a specific place. Now, it depended on something far deeper: people. People transformed, carrying the message within them. And that changes everything. Empires fall, structures disappear, systems are replaced. But what is true remains and grows, even in the face of opposition, persecution, even when everything around it seems to collapse. That is why, 2,000 years later, we still speak about it, about those streets, that city, that week. Because what happened there did not remain in the past. It still echoes, it still confronts, it still calls. And perhaps this is the most important part. Everything began in an imperfect place, chaotic, divided, full of real problems. And yet, it was there that everything changed. So the question remains, if the most transformative moment in history happened in the midst of chaos, imperfection, among ordinary people, what is stopping you? What are you still waiting for? What ideal conditions are you expecting that never come? Because maybe truth does not require a perfect setting. Maybe it only requires someone willing to respond and to live with purpose. I'll see you soon.